What is up, everyone? Piscean here, and it's been a while since I've, came on camera and showed you guys how messy I look. Um, in this video, I do want to talk about something pretty serious, and that is the historical female medical experimentation that we are bearing witness to currently, and we have since the beginning of human history. So, please like, subscribe, comment, share if you dare and care with peace and love. And I appreciate those of you that are still subscribed to the channel. So, if you see me looking over here, it's because I have my tablet right here with my notes written on it. And essentially, this might surprise some people, but when I read this first paragraph, I just realized the reality of our situation. And as females and as a radical feminist, medical experimentation on females, particularly women of color, enslaved people, the deemed poor, and those deemed undesirable, reveals a long pattern where the female body, especially for the reproductive system in a female, has been served as a testing ground for scientific ambition, population control, and profit. In this, her story, instead of history, intersects with racism, classism, eugenics, and patriarchal assumptions about women's roles. While some advances benefited medicine broadly, they often came at immense human costs, frequently without informed consent. Okay? The most notorious case involves J. Marion Sims, long called the father of modern gynecology, which is just, there shouldn't even be a father of gynecology. In the 1840s in Montgomery, Alabama, essentially, Sims performed repeated experimental surgeries on enslaved black women, including Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy, without anesthesia. He aimed to repair vesico vaginal fistulas, a devastating childbirth injury causing incontinence. Anarcha endured at least 30 operations, 30. Sims operated in a backyard Negro hospital, quote unquote, with owner's permission but no consent from the women. He also experimented on enslaved infants and later some poor white women, often Irish immigrants. These procedures advanced surgical techniques, for example, the Sims speculum and position, but at the price of excruciating pain, infections, and lifelong suffering. So, the racist belief that black people felt less pain justified the lack of anesthesia. Sims' legacy remains contested. Statues have been removed in recent years amid reckoning with this history. This era established gynecology partly through the exploitation of marginalized female bodies. In the mid-20th century, thalidomide and the exclusion backlash. In the late 1950s, early 1960s, thalidomide was marketed as a safe sedative and morning sickness remedy for pregnant women in Europe, Australia, and elsewhere, not fully approved in the USA due to FDA reviewer Francis Kelsey. It caused one of the worst pharmaceutical diseases. Over 10,000 children born with severe birth defects, phocomelia, shortened or absent limbs, plus thousands of miscarriages and deaths. The tragedy prompted stricter regulations, but also a protective overreaction. In 1977, the FDA excluded women of quote unquote women of childbearing potential from most early phase clinical trials to avoid fetal risk. This led to decades of underrepresentation of women in research, resulting in poorer data on how drugs affect female physiology. For example, exogenous hormones, but also differing metabolism and, of course, hormones. Policy shifted in the 1990s with NIH mandates for inclusion. Women were harmed both as unwitting subjects, thalidomide, and as excluded subjects, knowledge gaps in women's health. There's contraceptive devices and coercion, the Dalkon Shield. The Dalkon Shield IUD was aggressively marketed as safe and effective. Its multi-filament tail acted as a wick, allowing vaginal bacteria into the uterus. It caused widespread pelvic inflammatory disease, also known as PID, infertility, septic abortions, perforations, and at least 18 through 20 deaths. Over 2 million U.S. women used it. Hundreds of thousands were injured. Lawsuits bankrupted the company. This fit a broader pattern of population control experiments, especially on women in Puerto Rico and among minorities where early birth control pills were tested with limited consent. We're going to talk about eugenics and forced sterilizations. I also believe people are getting and are becoming more sterilized, and they're under the impression it's their own choice when really it's the government doing it to you. You're just going along with it blindly. From the early 1900s through the 1970s and echoes later, U.S. eugenics programs sterilized tens of thousands of women, often poor, disabled, mentally ill, or women of color, without full consent. Indiana passed the first law in 1907. California led with 20,000 procedures. The 1927 Supreme Court case Buck v. Bell upheld sterilization, with Justice Holmes declaring 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. Puerto Rico, up to 1/3 of childbearing age women sterilized by the 1970s under U.S. influenced population policies. That's insane. Native American women, thousands sterilized via Indian Health Service in the 1970s. Black and Latina women faced disproportionate targeting, sometimes under coercion, usually tied to welfare or prison sentences. Nazi programs drew inspiration from U.S. eugenics. Similar forced sterilizations occurred globally. I want to talk about Henrietta Lacks and immortal cells, because in 1951, Henrietta Lacks, who is literally an African American woman with cervical cancer at Johns Hopkins, had tumor cells taken without her knowledge or consent. These became the HeLa cell line, the first immortal human cells, quote unquote, revolutionizing polio vaccine development, cancer research, genetics, and more, used in thousands of studies and patents. Her family learned decades later and received no compensation initially. A 2023 settlement with a company profiting from them addressed some harms. This highlights ongoing issues of bodily autonomy and benefit sharing in research. Okay. Hold up 1 second. Alright, here we go. So I want to talk about broader patterns and lessons here. Reproductive focus is the first thing. The female body, womb, hormones, fertility has been a prime site for experimentation due to its perceived, quote-unquote, mysterious or controllable nature. Intersectionality is a whole nother thing. Enslaved African American women, poor immigrants, indigenous women, and Puerto Ricans bore disproportionate burdens. Regulatory swings from lax oversight enabling harm, like thalidomide and Dalkin Shield, to over-exclusion harming knowledge. Legacy, we have these cases, and they drove modern ethics, informed consent, IRB oversight, NIH inclusion policies, but also persistent distrust in medical systems among affected communities. And we see the connection to contemporary issues. We know parallels exist in debates over medical interventions on sex bodies, especially youth. For example, rapid hormonal treatments with lifelong endocrine, skeletal, reproductive, and neurological effects. History warns against prioritizing ideology or speed over rigorous sex-specific evidence and consent. The Saturnine principle of limit material reality, including immutable XX chromosomes and female physiology, remains foundational. Bodies remember, ethics demand we do too. Henrietta Lacks, also born Loretta Pleasant, was like I said, African American woman whose cervical cancer cells were taken without her knowledge or consent in 1951 at Johns Hopkins Hospital, and it became the first immortal human cell line, HeLa. The cells revolutionized biomedical research and remain one of the most widely used tools in science today, yet their origin story highlights profound ethical failures rooted in race, class, and the era's lax standards around informed consent. So Henrietta Lacks grew up in rural Virginia as one of 10 children in a poor family. She moved to Baltimore with her husband David Day Lacks, worked in a steel mill, and raised 5 children. In early 1951, after giving birth to her 5th child, she experienced severe vaginal bleeding and a quote-unquote knot in her womb. She sought treatment at Johns Hopkins Hospital, one of the few facilities in the segregated South that treated black patients in the quote-unquote colored ward. Doctors diagnosed her with aggressive cervical cancer, initially classified as epidermoid carcinoma, later identified as adenocarcinoma. During her radium treatment, standard at the time, surgeon Laurent Wharton Jr. took two tissue samples from her cervix, one from the tumor and one from healthy tissue, without her knowledge or consent, and these were given to a researcher, Dr. George Otto Gay, who had been trying and failing to culture human cells long term. Henrietta's cancer metastasized rapidly. She suffered greatly, underwent further treatments, and died on October 4th, 1951, at age 31. She was buried in an unmarked grave in Virginia. Her family was never informed about the cells. In Gay's lab, Henrietta's tumor cells behaved unlike any before. They divided rapidly and indefinitely in culture. Labeled HeLa, first two letters of her first and last name, they became the first quote-unquote immortal human cell line capable of proliferating without the usual Hayflick limit, the finite divisions normal cells undergo before senescence. So why immortal? HeLa cells have high telomerase activity, which maintains telomere caps on chromosomes, preventing degradation and cell death. They are highly aneuploid, abnormal chromosome number, around 76 through 82 instead of 46, with structural rearrangements and mutations, for example in P53 and other tumor suppressors, fueling aggressive growth. Okay? So, I would like to speak about the scientific contributions. So HeLa cells enabled countless breakthroughs because they were easy to grow, ship, and use. The polio vaccine, Jonas Salk's team used them to test and develop the vaccine in the 1950s. Cancer research, chemotherapy testing, for example, Taxol, and understanding cancer mechanisms. Virus studies including herpes, HIV/AIDS, and COVID-19 vaccine development. Space research sent to zero gravity to study cellular effects, as well as genetics and cell biology. Chromosome visualization, telomerase discovery leading to the 2009 Nobel Prize for Blackburn, Greider, and Szostak, gene mapping, and more. Thousands of studies on toxins, radiation, drugs, and basic cellular processes. HeLa cells have been used in over 100,000 scientific publications and commercialized extensively. The cells were taken at a time when informed consent was not standard, especially for African American patients in segregated care. Johns Hopkins and researchers shared HeLa cells freely with colleagues worldwide, but the family learned of their existence only in 1975, over 20 years later, when researchers contacted them for blood samples without full explanation. Henrietta's name and medical records were publicized without permission. So key issues, in my opinion, lack of consent and bodily autonomy, first of all. Henrietta and her family received no compensation or recognition while others profited. Okay, privacy violations, genetic information, descendants shared DNA with HeLa, was made public. Racial injustice echoes patterns of exploitation in medical research on black bodies, for example, J. Marianne Sims experiments. Commercialization, billions in profits from products derived from HeLa, with no benefit to the family for decades. Johns Hopkins has acknowledged the story, established scholarships and honors in her name, and worked on ethics reforms. In 2013, an NIH agreement gave the Lacks family some oversight on certain uses of HeLa genome data. In 2021, the Lacks family sued Thermo Fisher Scientific for unjust enrichment. They reached a confidential settlement in August 2023, not that long ago, on what would have been Henrietta's 103rd birthday. A similar settlement with Novartis occurred in early 2026. These cases highlighted ongoing commercialization long after the ethical issues were public. Henrietta Lacks' story, popularized by Rebecca Skloot's 2010 book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, catalyzed global discussions on bioethics, consent, benefit sharing, and equity in research. It underscores the tension between scientific progress and individual rights, especially for marginalized groups. HeLa cells continue to be vital, but their use now involves stricter ethical guidelines. The family has become advocates for cervical cancer awareness and research equity, with some members serving as WHO Goodwill ambassadors. Henrietta Lacks' unconsented contribution saved millions of lives indirectly, yet at the cost of her family's dignity and her own unrecognized personhood. Her cells are immortal. The ethical questions they raise endure. The case remains a cornerstone for modern policies on biospecimens, informed consent, and justice in medicine. And really quick, another thing I do want to talk about, and I should probably save this for its own video though. is Mercury's androgynous shadow. Why are we seeing all this behavior that we're seeing now with astrology, numerology, and the disappearance of womanhood under transgender dogma? An advanced philosophy essay for radical feminist faculty. So I think I will save this for its own video. I hope to see you guys there with peace and love. Piscean out.